So I'm very excited to make the introductions of our guests tonight. The first person, Isabella Boylston, ABT principal dancer, has been likened to champagne on the stage by the New York Times and holds a championship ring for top performance in Harvard's Crossover to Business program. Please welcome Isabella. Devon Teuscher, ABT principal dancer, is described as a poet in ballet shoes whose dancing is firmly dramatic, coolly decisive, enigmatic, often mysteriously calm by the New York Times. Very Jane Eyre. Please welcome Devon. And finally, Cathy Marston, the choreographer of Jane Eyre, making its American debut June 4th at the Metropolitan Opera House, has been described by the Financial Times as a textbook example of dance storytelling, in which she places the emphasis squarely on Jane's transformation from downtrodden orphan to independent woman. Please welcome Cathy. Okay, so I was very excited to have this opportunity to have this conversation with the women from ABT and to talk about classics, because I work at Penguin Classics, and what we think about every single day is that question, what makes a classic? Over the years I've been there, and for many decades, our contributors and writers have been thinking about this when they introduce our great works of literature. And I just wanted to share some of the descriptions that other writers have thought about when you think what makes a classic. Rebecca Mead, when she introduced our edition of Middlemarch, she described it as thinking about a book over the course of your life, and the meaning keeps changing. When you come back to this book, you'll find different surprises and different meanings depending on where you are in your life. Rupi Kaur, for The Prophet, described how the book expressed words that her father couldn't express to her. And that's how some people find great works of literature. They are able to tell the tale that you can't tell yourself. Elaine Castillo on America is in the Heart talks about representation and that power of being seen. When you hear your language, see your town, see your people in a great work of literature, how much power there is in that. And then Elif Batuman recently, for our upcoming edition of The Age of Innocence, I'll quote her directly. Eventually, each classic tells two stories, its own and the story of all the times one has read it. And to add to this, I wanted to add a quote from Twyla Tharp. I read for growth, firmly believing that what you are today and what you will be in 5 years depends on two things, the people you meet and the books you read. So I wanted to ask each one of you about what classics are meaningful to you in your life. These can be any form of art, doesn't necessarily have to be a work of literature, perhaps it's a dance, perhaps it's a film. But is there a creative work that makes you feel similarly as these writers have over the course of your life? A favorite classic in some sense?
I'm gonna start. I had a little idea to add. It's a silly one, but I really love those little descriptions that you offered. Yeah. And I was thinking about what is a classic for me. And you know, like portraits, when you have a portrait on the wall and the eyes follow you around the room wherever you go. I thought for me, in a way, it's like that wherever you move. And it's similar to, I think, the Age of Innocence description that you gave, that wherever you go, it seems to connect with you regardless of your position in terms of it. So for me, it's usually books, but also music. Weirdly, less so dance pieces. So I mean, for me, a couple of pieces that stay with me are Lolita. I love Lolita, and I've read that since I was not quite Lolita's age, but not that far off, until I became a mother. I actually choreographed a ballet of Lolita a week before I gave birth to my second child. Wow. I premiered it, and that gave a whole other perspective to it, but equally rich. The Unbearable Lightness of Being is a book that I adore. Or a piece of music. So, for example, The Unanswered Question by Charles Ives. I still haven't managed to choreograph to it yet, but it sort of sits. So it's, yeah, is that what you mean? Is that what you
absolutely.
want?
Yeah, is there a piece of art, it could be an album or song, that you just think is formative to your life?
Well, this is probably a very bunhead response, but I think one of the classics that has been ever present in my life, at least since I became a ballerina at ABT, is Swan Lake. And I think what makes it a classic is the music and also just the epic nature of the role, and also the complexity of the role. It just feels like it's a ballet we do every year, and so every time I come back to it, I see it in a completely new way, and I still feel like I don't fully understand it, and I don't think I'll ever understand it until maybe the day I retire, so, yeah.
I think very similarly, like Swan Lake is, for me, is a kind of bunhead response, like that's a classic, but I think what makes it a classic to me is that it really can withstand the test of time, and it continually comes back, because I think what Bella's saying, she never fully understands it, is there's so many kind of eternal truths in it. You know, there's like these truths in life that, good, bad, like I like to think of them as like these eternal truths, and they're what kind of people guide their life by and like live their life by. And I think for me, ballet, any form of a classic, really tells the story of these truths, whatever they are. So, and I think those withstand the test of time because they are just what people live their lives by.
That's great. Cathy, how did you first come to the idea of doing Jane Eyre?
It was actually, I was asked to make a ballet of Jane Eyre. It was a really good idea, but I can't claim it for my own. So I've worked several times with Northern Ballet, which is a company in the UK, in Leeds. And they're actually based very close to kind of Bronte country. And David Nixon, the director, rang up one day and said, how about Jane Eyre? And we knew each other very well already by that point, and I couldn't believe I'd not thought of it before. But yes, the answer was straight away, yes, absolutely. One of the challenges, of course, well, I mean, I could talk, you can shut me up.
No, please, keep going.
You connect with a book and you think, yes, you can already imagine some of the scenes choreographically. But then there's always, challenges to overcome when you're bringing something from a book to the stage. One of them being, it's quite a big chunk of a book, and we'd tell it in just over an hour and a half. So you have to sort of really be able to strip it down. But also just simple things like a ballet company is made up of men and women, we all know. And in Jane Eyre, there's really 3-4 male characters. And so the first time I said, yes, I'll do it, and I wrote a cast list and a sort of team of collaborators that I wanted to make the piece with. And he called me right back and he's like, what am I going to do with my men? Like, go away and think of something. And it was a really wonderful challenge because it made me go away and think more creatively about what I wanted to say about this novel. And I invented these characters that we call the D-men, which are sort of kind of death men, but mainly Jane's inner demon. So I figured that there's these scenes in the book. She's traveling, for example, from Lowood to Thornfield, and she stays in the inn, and there's these shadowy male figures that sort of en route who slightly intimidate her. Or there's lots of men in her life that do things that block her path, that stop her getting to where she wants to go to. And they all seem to be men, or mainly, apart from her aunt, seem to be men. And I figured, well, let's personify these inner demon. And so the ballet is kind of peopled with these male characters. And I think it works. It doesn't feel like I'm not honoring the text. It feels that I'm just expanding what's written. Yeah, I could talk more, but go on with your next question.
Well, that's interesting. I just wanted to share an anecdote because we had the great pleasure of watching a little bit of the rehearsal, and I overheard you saying something about you were thinking about very specific lines of the book, and you're trying to explain how to express them by very specific dance moves. And I just wanted to know more about that process. Did you have passages that you wrote down and really worked on those and did that inspire you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my process with every ballet that I make, and sometimes they're not from novels, they could also be biographical, but I'll usually prepare, before I get to the studio, lists of words that describe each character. And they're usually adjectives and verbs, I don't know, prickly or smooth or bubbly or fiery, or, you know, different words. And the thing that I'll do with the dancers to begin the creative process is simply make movement phrases inspired by those words, not for any particular scene. And that gives each character a very specific vocabulary. Sometimes we'll find little leitmotifs, or certainly their way of standing or walking and being. But in the case of Jane Eyre, we did that, and some of those words were taken directly from the Bronte, but not all. But beyond that, every time we approached a scene, we spent quite a lot of time in rehearsal just really analysing, you know, the journey that was going on in these particular scenes, especially the pas de deux. I think each pas de deux is really related to scenes from the book. And sometimes the images were so wonderful. I think when you came into rehearsal, was that the one with the water? I think it's when it's after the wedding, when she discovers that Rochester's married, and she says that she felt like she's on a dry riverbed, and then it feels like the flood is coming down from the mountain. I'm obviously paraphrasing badly. And she feels like she's drowning. So really, the movement is very much anchored in those descriptive sentences.
That's so interesting. I think that the audience would love just seeing these words choreographed. And
do you know what Northern Ballet do, actually, which is wonderful? One of the dancers, the one that created the part of Mrs. Fairfax, they do these audio descriptive performances for visually impaired people, so they can have little headphones, and this dancer reads the whole ballet. She describes
really
it,
cool.
and she has all of those images
Awesome.
because she was in the rehearsals when we were making it.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Devon and Isabella, when talk about the American Ballet Theater, I wanted to know if you could describe the theater part of ABT. How does that come into play when you perform, and what could the audience observe about this special part of you approaching Jane Eyre in terms of theater?
You want to start?
Sure. Well, personally, that's why I love being a part of ABT, is the theater aspect. I think we have the opportunity to tell stories and really dive into characters and do movement that is telling a story. It's not just necessarily for movement's sake, which is beautiful and wonderful to do, but at this point in my life, I'm really enjoying like the opportunity to express myself through dance and tell these stories. So that theater aspect is really exciting. And yeah, I just think it's such an individual process. Everyone has such an individual process of how they go about telling their story and go about finding different ways to tell their story and make it true to themselves. I think for me personally, the biggest part of telling a ballet story and being a character is I need to really believe in it myself. I need to believe in the story completely 100% and make it kind of align with not make it align with me, like not make, what would I do? It's what would that character do, correct? But it's just I need to really believe in that, and in order to really believe in that, there's a lot of work to get yourself into a certain place and kind of align yourself with that character. So for me, that's a big part, is like just really knowing what I'm doing and believing in every single aspect and like why I would make the choice I would make necessarily as that character, and why I would react the way I would as that character. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting part about being able to tell stories.
You have all had experience performing classic characters, and you were talking about Swan Lake before. When you approach a classic character, what kind of preparation or approach do you take in your creative process? Do you look at previous interpretations?
Yeah, for me, my approach has changed a lot over time, just with maturity and confidence and experience. But yeah, when I first started out leading principal roles and doing these really dramatic characters like Giselle or Juliet, I would go back and like go to the New York Public Performing Arts Library and watch as many old videos as I could to just, I don't know, give myself ideas. And I think at that point I was in a way using like the character's physicality to teach me about acting, having very minimal experience with acting. But now I think I build the character a lot more from the inside out. And so for me, that's like kind of what Cathy was saying, giving myself lines. Like I'll go through every scene and give myself like little things I can think about, words I can say to myself. And also try to establish very clearly my relationship with the other characters in the story, because you want it to be really spontaneous when you get out there. So the more you can feed off your co-stars, the better.
That's great. You were all listening to a bit of the music before we came on stage, and I wanted to ask Cathy about the choices made for music and set design for Jane Eyre.
Mm-hmm. So the scenario was developed with the designer. In this case, often I work with a dramaturg, but in this case, Patrick Kinmouth is the set and costume designer and the co-scenario writer, which made it very integrated, which was wonderful. I have a preference to stripping back the look of ballets, even though the story is really important to me. I want to tell it physically rather than through objects as much as possible. So the set describes, or suggests maybe than describes, both exterior and interior landscapes. So we get the kind of moorland of Yorkshire, and we get these kind of suggestions of architectural paneling and so on, a bit like we have here. But they're not, it's not like watching a film or a TV adaptation of the piece at all. And it really gives space for the dance. Each scene is really, the only set as such is a chair. So there's different chairs to represent the different interiors that we play in. And likewise, the costumes are suggesting the period, but they ultimately are beautiful to watch the bodies moving in as well. In terms of the music, it's brought together by a composer and arranger who I work often with called Philip Feeney. And he suggested, which was a brilliant idea, using the music of Fanny Mendelssohn as the kind of anchor. So she was the sister of Felix Mendelssohn and is a contemporary of the Brontes. And like the Brontes, she was a woman, and perhaps overlooked a little more in her own lifetime than she should have been. So it felt like that was a really wonderful voice to use as Jane's voice, if you like. And we also use a little bit of Felix's music and some Schubert, which actually is a bit older. It's a bit before the period, but that felt appropriate for the Rochester scenes, the sort of stuffy Thornfield scenes. We felt like Schubert would work there. And then Philip has written some beautiful original music to kind of bring it all together, and he really knits it into one score. And particularly in some of the scenes, the fire scenes, we discovered if we used any 19th century music for those, it just sounded like a big melodrama. So he's written some original music to bring it into one piece.
Wonderful. So I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of Jane Eyre, the book, and I wanted to indulge myself and read my favorite quote. This might be other people's favorite quote. But when I read this, I really perked up, and I was like, this, in the best parts of classic literature, sometimes I feel when it hits you, it's like, this is so modern. This could be said by the woman next to me, like breaking up with her boyfriend in this restaurant right now. You know, different language, but same spirit. So I just wanted to read the few lines that many of you probably also love. Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you and full as much heart. And if God had gifted me with some beauty and much wealth, I should have made it as hard for you to leave me as it is now for me to leave you. I am not talking to you now through the medium of custom, conventionalities, or even of mortal flesh. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed through the grave and we stood at God's feet, equal as we are. That just gives me chills. I love that. So I wanted to ask you, each of you, what do you find most rewarding about portraying this iconic character and getting to tell her story?
think I'm still figuring it out. Let's see. Well, maybe I'll share one of my favorite lines. I love in the beginning when Jane is a kid, and I think this just reveals so much about her wit and intelligence and character. And is it Brocklehurst asks her, so how do you not go to hell? And she says, basically, just don't die. That really cracked me up. Sorry, I didn't really answer the question.
No, I
think
that's
I'm stalling.
But she said something. Can I share what you said in the studio?
yeah.
Because I thought that was a brilliant Jane answer. We were doing, so there's a scene in the book where she's got her paintings and Rochester's looking, and he says something along the lines of, so did that all come out of your head? And she says yes, and something like that. Anyway, so we kind of have this little moment in one of the pas de deux, and she's doing this little descriptive thing that's supposed to be revealing something of her. And he stops her and he kind of interrogates that a moment, and then he pulls back, and then she carries on. And I said to Bella, I said, why are you carrying on? And she said, because I haven't finished. I thought that was really Jane and perfect.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I just love about Jane is even from the start with Rochester, she just matches. There's like nothing he can throw at her that she can't like come back and match intellectually, or I don't know. She's just a very, I guess, intelligent woman.
Yeah.
I would call her very gritty too. Like she's got a lot of grit. She's very like, she stands up for herself, and she doesn't kind of care what people think of her necessarily. She's very much like what she thinks is right is very important to her, and kind of again like these moral truths. Like those are very important to her, and so I think she really like she does what she thinks is correct and right, and whether that is necessarily makes her happy or not. And you know, there's a lot of times where she could have been like, she could stay with Rochester and potentially be very happy, but just out of like, she can't do that because she is so kind of centered morally on what she thinks is right and wrong. She leaves, and she's very unhappy about it, but it's what she has to do. So.
Yeah. She's got a lot of self-restraint. What were you saying in the car on the way up here? You were saying something really interesting about how you feel over the course of the book that
she learns emotional intelligence, I feel. She doesn't really get it. She can't control it. She doesn't know, she doesn't like herself, so she doesn't understand herself, and she can't control herself at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And because we've got this little motif, she presses stuff down a fair bit. Mm-hmm. And the question is whether she's repressing all of those things, which to some extent she is in certain moments, but I feel by the end she is not repressed. She's kept things, she's dealt with them rather than pushed them into a box. So she comes back at the end, I feel, having sorted herself out as internally as much as externally.
And the great partnership of Jane is, the other half is Rochester. And as a female choreographer, I was intrigued by how you portray Rochester. What about him intrigued you, and what about him was a challenge?
The thing is, Rochester is written by a woman, right? So I think there's something, it's a woman's version of this anti-hero, or he's not really heroic, but there are many things about Rochester, and we've talked about this in the studio, that are not nice. You know, he does a lot of bad things. And yet, I completely adore him. And I've been trying to work out what that is. And I suppose we have to remember that A, he was written by a woman, but B, it's Jane's point of view. The whole book is written from her point of view, and the ballet pretty much too. And Jane doesn't know until quite a long way in, Jane doesn't know the bad things. So he does come across as moody and abrupt and sort of sultry and, all of that. But actually that's quite attractive to her. She's drawn into it. And he becomes this thing that she can counter. He brings out her intelligence. He gives her opportunity to, spar and find out things that she thinks. So that is quite attractive. She doesn't know all those bad things. So a lot of what for me, I adore in him is because she loves that too. And when she gets to the point, when we reveal what he's done with Bertha, there's a great part of us that still feels that we want to redeem him. We want that to work out and be okay. So I suppose I've gone with that desire to want him to be okay by the end. I mean, there's a whole other ballet to make, of course, where he's not, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, he does try to rescue Bertha from the fire, and he is, by the end, brought into some sort of lesser egotistical place. So I do kind of fall in love with him like Jane does.
And how about both of you? How are you working through that relationship between them in your performance?
Well, I think, personally, I think that I spoke a little bit about this in the car as well. I think, Jane is a very lonely person. From the beginning, she has no one. And I think, to me, that's one of probably the biggest journeys she goes on is in the book is feeling alone and not feeling like she kind of fits in. And not that she desires to fit in. She doesn't want to be like, the next person. But she wants to feel like herself. And there's no one else other than potentially Rochester who makes her feel like herself. He matches her intelligence. He challenges her, which no other man has ever challenged her intellectually, has ever come along and done this. I don't think really there's been any other person at this point that in the book that challenges her. So I think she really enjoys that challenge. So for me, my interactions with Rochester are very much based on him making me feel like myself, making me feel comfortable, making me feel like I am good enough and like I have value, and not that it's him making me feel that way, but it's the first time I feel that way. So.
How about you?
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, I feel like I'm very early on the journey of becoming Jane right now, because we're still learning steps. But my partner, Tom, is he is the nicest guy. He's incredibly charming and hilarious. So I feel like he's gonna have to find his Rochester, which is so far from his natural character, thankfully. And I think we're just gonna find it together as we go through this process.
But you have the comparison with St. John, and that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Because St. John, to some extent, matches her intelligence. You get an opposition. She doesn't have to go with Rochester because this other guy does offer her something. And it's even in the choreographic material, she wants to see beyond her horizon. Well, he's offering her an opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. It's just he's got these icy kisses and
feel right.
Yeah. So I think Rochester, he loves you, right?
Yeah, and you love him. There's that thing that feels right between the two of them.
Mm.
So I haven't seen anything about her, but I'm fascinated by what do you do with Bertha in this?
That is, there definitely is another ballet that I would love to make there. So Bertha doesn't have as large a role as she could in the other ballet in my head. She's obviously, she appears for the end. She's interrupts the wedding. So we had to take a shortcut, for example. That was one of the things when you adapt. We didn't want her brother to interrupt the wedding because who on earth's he if he suddenly comes onto stage? That's confusing. So Bertha herself interrupts the wedding, and that becomes much more of a dramatic scene than it is in the book. And there's a fantastic pas de deux. They did that the other day and everyone erupted into applause in the first run-through when she sort of unleashes everything at the end and sets fire to the house and so on. So she has these featured moments, and there's the first appearance she makes actually is in a shadow play, and I think that's, what I'm saying. There's a moment after Jane and Rochester's first encounter, and Jane is all kind of knotted stomach. She has this motif where her stomach's all butterflies and she doesn't know what she's feeling. She's never experienced that before. And so she's sitting on this chair and there's a curtain just here, and we do one of those theatre things where you can light behind the curtain and see the silhouette of the person that's standing behind. And for a moment they coordinate, so it's almost like a giant shadow of Jane, but it's Bertha, but we don't know who that is yet. And then as Jane sort of tries to stop thinking about the kind of butterflies in her stomach that she's suddenly discovering, Bertha goes into quite a kind of full-on raunch, for want of a better word. So I suppose what I'm saying is Bertha is the desire that Jane doesn't recognize and doesn't know what to do with. Bertha is fire. Fire is quite a symbol for me in the story. She's in this red dress, torn sort of red dress, and she is like fire. She's the fire that gets put out and lit, and that burns inside both Rochester and Jane to some point, to some extent.
I can't wait to see that. I wanted to move on to talk about books and storytelling, and start with Devon. In terms of, you've been a dancer for a long time, and as a child, I wanted to know, what were your first inspirations in terms of storytelling appealing to you?
Interesting enough, I hated reading when I was a child. I was taught a very incorrect way, and it was just really made me dislike reading kind of completely when I was a kid. They used to have to force me to sit down and read, and it was not enjoyable. So I think maybe that's where I turned to dance. I didn't get a lot of inspiration from books. That came much later in life, and I now love reading, and it's become a passion. But I think maybe that's why I turned to movement, because that's the way I could relate to stories, and that's the way I could kind of see stories being told through movement. So yeah, that was I'm just having a realization now that maybe that's why I became a dancer, because I hated books.
And now currently we recently discovered that you have your own book club.
Oh, yes.
Which I don't understand when you have time to do this, but I'm very impressed by it. So it is #Ballerina Book Club. Can you tell us how you started it, why?
Yeah, well, as you said, it is very informal because I don't have a lot of time. But I always have been a huge bookworm ever since I was a kid. I would just read all the time, at the dinner table. You could not tear me away from my books. And I guess I wanted a way to connect with my audience on social media that wasn't only through dance. And I thought, well, it's a pretty universal thing that people can get into. And the first book was a year ago maybe, and it was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. How do you say it? Le Guin, yeah. So check out the hashtag and join the club.
Join the club, that's great. You all touched upon classics at the beginning of our conversation, but if there were any others, I was thinking about the fact that Jane Eyre is so iconic. What other iconic ballets and roles have you enjoyed the most, both watching from the audience and also performing?
Well, okay, I'll answer another question. I guess Giselle is probably my favorite ballet. I don't know. Honestly, it's whatever I'm doing is usually my favorite ballet. But yeah, Giselle is definitely one of my most treasured roles. I don't know, I think it's a pretty perfect ballet all around, and it's a very old ballet, but I don't know, the second act is pretty abstract actually, almost like a Balanchine ballet. It's almost like two different ballets in one, and it's very challenging dramatically and technically, and it's a great ballet. I think we're doing it next year, so not this year.
That's great.
Yeah, interesting. Well, speaking of Giselle, I haven't done Giselle, but I've done Myrta, who is only in the second act. And
she's the foil to the protagonist, Giselle, yeah. She's
kind of this boss, amazing woman. She's a man killer, and she's, it's cool. It's really cool.
And I think we've done it together, right?
Yes.
Yeah, several times.
Yeah, but also speaking of interpretation, I did it for quite a long time, kind of this one way where I thought, oh, she's this icy queen, you know, just comes out man killer, very like rare. And then there was kind of maybe 2 years ago, I was like, but I want to do something a little different with it. I want to, you know, I want to believe in her a little bit more. I want to make her somehow a little more like likable. I don't know about likable, but like who cares about this woman that just comes out and has no heart and just kills people and like doesn't care about anyone, you know? So I had this whole journey of trying to figure out like, what is Myrta's story? She's, you know, she's also in the ballet. Why is she where she's at? It's because a man has, you know, men have betrayed her, and why does she feel this way? And why is she the queen of the Willies? Why is, you know, she in charge of all of these women? And so it's interesting, like it's been a real journey to try and it goes against a lot of what people really think of her as a character. So I'm trying to like fight my way to like make her a little more lovable. In like up to a certain point, right? Like, and make her journey as important as Giselle's journey. So that's been a really fun character to kind of grow over the years and like continue to grow. So
that sounds a lot like what we ask our contributors to do with our Penguin Classics editions. It's like, can you come to this work of literature that many people already know, but in a fresh way? And the fact that you are trying to develop this new sense of coming to a character that people have already judged is kind of in the same spirit.
It's hard to like break these kind of ideas of what people think of something. It can be a real challenge to be like,
sorry.
No, but you know, to challenge people to think about someone in a different way is really hard.
Yeah,
but,
and I cool. Sorry, Des.
No,
I try to talk over you.
No,
I really want to say this. No, I think sometimes you can encounter some resistance because people are like, they've seen a certain ballet a certain way for a really long time, and then, but I think that's just, Devon and I are both really like story-driven dancers, and so I think that's something we both really enjoy doing, is like just making everything our own.
Yeah, making it as relatable and human as possible. You know, she's a dead Willie, like how relatable is that? But like, you have to, like I'm telling a story, so I have to relate to her in some way, and in order to do that, you know, you have to make it human. You have to make these stories human and reachable to everyone.
And Cathy, I wanted to ask you about the importance of the bridge that I see, and your audience will see, is you have Charlotte Bronte, this woman, you have you as the choreographer, then you have the principal ballerinas, and this bridge of creative leadership among the women. How do you feel about that as being part of this major project in terms of interpreting work with these women leading the way?
Do you mean the women's movement of ABT and so on? I mean, I'm honoured and quite kind of stunned to be, as I think you said in the introduction, the first woman to create a full-length ballet on in their programme since 1980. I mean, gosh, I'm just proud as well that we're getting there. It feels like it's time, you know, we just have to do it. And I don't want to put too much thought into that whole thing. I just want to make the work that I'm making. We were talking about it in the car on the way here, this question, because it's, you know, you have a special bridge between all, in every project, whether it's coming from a female written source or a male written source, and whether I'm working primarily with the ballerina or with the male dancer, it's always going to be special. I suppose in Jane Eyre, there are little moments that I connect to about Jane's character, and I think you both do too, and I don't think that would be the same if you were, like, it's a shortcut, you know, it's girl to girl or woman to woman. There are a few experiences, you know, I'm just thinking of that, there's a little moment where there's a D-man scene, and Jane's trying to get in this direction, and Marshall comes up and stands right in front of you, right? And she's blocked, and then she turns and he blocks her again. And I don't know if men experience that kind of physical intimidation in the same way that women do.
Yeah.
So I think there are things that just go without saying. And I feel with these dancers, a lot is going without saying. I mean, speaking a lot in rehearsals, but actually I don't think I need to, because it's all going on very instinctively or very thoughtfully with the dancers at ABT. I'm not sure if that really answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I'm going to be sharing some very thoughtful questions from audience members. So the first question, and this is to any of you who would like to answer it, it's similar to what you were saying now. It's what do you feel the ballet of Jane Eyre will say about the story and characters that words absolutely can't?
I mean, I think we kind of touched on this. I don't know if this is going to answer the question or not. Yeah. For me, it's cool to do a really female-driven story. Like a lot of ballets, especially the classics, are driven mostly by the male, and the woman kind of can't do much unless the man comes along and saves her. And I feel Jane Eyre's unique. I'm sure there are many others that I'm not thinking of ballets-wise, but unique in that she really drives the story, and it's like her story. And I also love that you finished the ballet in this way, like it's just her. It's not her and Rochester, which is, I think, also a great, relationship, but it's her story. And so I think that's unique to have a ballet that's really female-driven and like not reliant on kind of any other person to come and save her, come and make the story happen. Like she's just making her choices, and she's driving the story. So
I think there's a few things that words take quite a long time to do, and dance can do very succinctly when they get it right. So I can only use examples. There's a moment after the fire duet. So Rochester's bed was on fire. Jane comes in, puts it all out, and there's that scene where they're both in the bedroom and she wants to go, and he says, "What, you're just going to leave like that? You just saved my life." So there's this that's part of the end of Act 1. And one of my favorite moments is she's sitting on the floor and her legs, she's a bit kind of tense still. And Rochester puts his hand on her knee and just sort of presses it down. And it could get so wrong. Like that can be so misinterpreted, as we all know now. But if they get it right, it says so much in that moment that I'm not quite sure how you would put that in words. Do you know what I mean? It's exactly the right level of pressure and the right sort of breath with it, the right musicality or timing. And it can describe the unspoken connection that they're both feeling, and the tension of that moment, and the kind of want to calm down, but at the same time as calming down, all their emotions are going like this. Yeah, and I think dance does. That's why I love dance, and that's why I love storytelling through dance, because just occasionally there's those moments that can actually do it better than words.
That's wonderful.
Well, also in ballet and story and dance, you can tell the subconscious and like what's happening, which is cool. You can, you can really like.
You can do two things at the same time.
Totally.
Yeah.
In that same pas de deux, there's moments where they're shaking hands, and like that's real life, right? And then they break in like this split second, and they go into this extremely like physical kind of rush of emotion, and then they come back, and it's like this is what's happening, but that was what we were feeling, So it's so cool that you can tell that through movement.
We loved seeing that part of the rehearsal. We were just breathless about it because we got it exactly, because it wasn't necessarily the same as the lines. It just added even more. It added so much more emotion to it. From the audience, someone wants to know, what research did you do when you found out you were cast as Jane?
Just reading the book, watch the movie, still reading the book. Yeah, mainly that, and then I guess the rest of the research was just in the studio with your body.
Yeah. I'm going to answer a question myself because my name's on this card. What book would Elda like to see realized as a ballet? I hope nobody I work with wrote this.
I'd like to know.
But I would say Shirley Jackson. Maybe We Have Always Lived in the Castle would be exciting. And
Cathy.
I think people are talking about her more, and she is an American master of horror. In a sense, also knows that cruelty and violence within social circles and the internal madness that can happen. Anyway, go. I would love to see that.
I really want to pick your brain.
Yes, we will have coffee. That and Nella Larson's passing, I think, would be very interesting. So the next question I have, and I think this one I would love all of you to answer it, is what do you see ballet evolving for future generations?
Well, I think there's lots of evolution to be done. I don't know. On the one hand, like, I love the classics. I love Petit Pas and Balanchine, and I love interpreting those as a woman of 2019. But I think just more like diversity and inclusion, more women choreographers, and I think it's going to be interesting. I think ballets are going to start being a lot more gender fluid. So ballet is an art form that is so women dance on point, men lift women, and of course there are biological differences. I physically can't lift Tom the way he can lift me. He's 6'4".
You're doing good.
I'm trying. But I think it'll be really interesting to see how ballet continues to reflect the evolution of culture, and hopefully I definitely think it will, and will therefore continue to flourish.
Yeah, I think that's what's fascinating is the history of ballet was really just followed what happens in politics and society, and it's kind of followed that same path, and so I hope it continues to just flourish and, like you said, continue to go in the way that we are going, that is more inclusive and is more open and minded in every single aspect of it.
I think, my passion, if it's not obvious by yet, is storytelling in dance, and diversity is key to that, because we're really limited until there's a really diverse array of dancers in the room. There's a limit to the stories that we can genuinely, authentically tell, but that's changing, and it's really exciting. And I think it's changing at the same time that dance technique is changing. So my style, although it's based on a ballet background, is not classical by any means. I use a lot of contemporary dance within the choreography, and simply using more contemporary partnering techniques enable different characters to be portrayed. So Jane spends a lot of the time taking the weight of Rochester, or countering or pulling away the weight of Rochester. And without that dance possibility, I don't think we would really be able to properly tell this story, or describe Jane. So the more that these little silos broken down, that we get different groups of dancers working together, different techniques influencing one another, we'll have more stories to tell. And I think as we go further and further into the 21st century, the way that audiences understand stories are going to develop. So I love time shifts and layers, and the more films that people watch and clips, we just get used to changing from one thing to another and making those connections. And that's really interesting to me, when things don't have to be linear and chronological, but you can sort of reference other places, other times, other people within a split second. And technology helps with that, obviously, on stage as well, in terms of the tricks that are possible to do with lights and video and set and all of that. So I think personally, I'm thrilled that storytelling is kind of coming back into vogue. We've spent quite a long time being fascinated by the abstract, and I just want to know about people, and I'm so excited that other people are coming back with interest in that. Yeah. So that's where I see the next decade or two.
And lastly, thinking about when I was a young student and we had access to see the Philharmonic or go to the ballet, it was very, very extraordinary to have that access. And when you have young people coming to the ballet for the first time, I would assume that they might be quite intimidated. But what would you say to a young person who's new to coming as your audience member, what they should look for when they sit down and watch you perform or watch your work?
I mean, sorry, is this Kathy's question? I don't know. I don't
it's
think
all of
there's
you.
any, I think people can find ballet really intimidating because, I don't know, you're in a like fancy theater a lot of the time. The people can be quite fancy. But there is no right or wrong way to watch a ballet. And like, you don't have to feel like you get it or don't get it. And I actually think people sometimes can be really misled by trying to like form opinions about what they're seeing. So yeah, there's no right way, there's no wrong way. Just like sit back, relax, and like be swept away.
Yeah, I think coming with an open mind, just being completely open to like what is about to happen before you and like be really present. And I think that's what's cool about live theater is like we actually have that opportunity because it's so rare nowadays that we all like shut our phones off and like sit and see something happening live. So like I think that's just trying to like be there for that moment and be as present as you are and be as open as you are, I think is a really cool thing to hopefully look forward to and, you know, not be intimidated by.
I'd agree. I mean, you've said it all. It's sometimes I'm guilty of this, of sitting back and just wanting something delivered. When you're tired and you've had a long day, you sit and I think that's the wrong way. And I try to tell myself that you have to lean in and engage and be open, and not worry about it too much. Just see what you see and experience what you experience, and don't feel like you're missing the point because you probably haven't.
Well, I want to thank you, all three of you, for having this conversation, and everybody, go see Jane Eyre, ABT. Thank you very much.